Katelaris. I've had 25 years medical experience after graduating from Sydney University, and I obtained an MD in a research thesis from the University of New South Wales. My interest in the industrial, culinary and medical uses of cannabis goes back many years. The motto I operated on at that stage was, if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. And I used my education to think through what the nature of the problems we're facing and how they can best be addressed. Right? The way I see the broad passage of history was that in times before the 1900s, the world ran basically on cellulose or carbohydrates, and a very important part of that was the cellulose that came from hemp fibre. In the 18th and 17th centuries, the majority of the world's clothing, their paper, a lot of the fuel oils and many other industrial products were grown from the soil, and things was in proper balance. Primary production was essential, but from the 1920s onwards there was a tectonic shift in the way we produced energy, especially in the form of hydrocarbons as extractive energies, and most of the problems we're now encountering is a result of that shift from carbohydrate to hydrocarbon. And I've basically devoted my life to a hemp revolution where we move back from a hydrocarbon economy and all the problems associated with that to a carbohydrate economy, where we can solve in one blow the problems of plastic pollution, of global warming, of all sorts of energy disbalances in the world. We can do that. We can rebalance the human race. So the people who do primary production, who use the land and the water to actually create energy, are back in a position of ascendancy. Right? As early as the 1930s, it was clear there was 25,000 or more different products of industrial use that can be made from different parts of the hemp plant. So my interests more recently, to be more focused, is on the building potential of cannabis, as well as its obvious textile use, but the building use in the form of hempcrete. Now, the building industry is a huge industry in Australia and in the world, but it's rather negative. We use a lot of volatile organic compounds, and it's really the genesis of the sick building syndrome, right? The petrochemical products that we're using in these buildings are actually making people sick. It creates buildings with a very limited life expectancy of the building, as well as damaging the health of those people in it. Hempcrete building creates a passively climate-controlled building with no outgassing of volatile organic compounds and a ambience that's very amenable to human existence. The cost of buildings, once we use the hempcrete properly, can be dramatically reduced. Because instead of having a multi-layered building involving bricks and aluminium membranes and plasters and all the rest, it can be done on a simple monolithic wall made out of a beneficial material. The hemp seed as a food is a uniquely nutritionally dense food. There is nothing better than hemp seed for human nutrition. It has a balanced blend of omega-3 and 6, as well as the essential vitamin and mineral cofactors to utilise those in the human body. Because the hemp seed can be produced well without any synthetic chemicals, it's by its nature an organic food source, right? And it's produced from a crop that has a multiplicity of other uses as well. So hemp seed is essential. Unfortunately, Australia and New Zealand remains the only two countries on earth where hemp seed is not permitted to be advertised as a human food, and we find this particularly disgraceful and involving a fair bit of effort to have the government reverse that decision. It's ironic that a group called the Forum, or the Forum on Food Regulation, which are made up of the health ministers of this country and the Prime Minister, actually voted down on two separate occasions the use of hemp seed as a human food. Okay, medicine. Cannabis medicine has a multiplicity of uses, and when properly applied, and by that I mean the judicious combination of the various cannabinoids, including THC and CBD, when properly applied, it can reduce our dependency on pharmaceutical medications, which are bringing as many problems as they are solutions. So cannabis medicines has found a ready place in a series of intractable conditions, including epilepsy, cancer treatment, pain and spasticity, and the list goes on and on. Some of them seemingly unrelated, such as Crohn's disease, inflammatory colitis, all appear to be responding to cannabis medicines. So in the first instance, we're actually using the cannabis medicines in those conditions that aren't well treated by allopathic medicine. and we hope to develop that as the regulatory framework is rolled back. Now, is there anything specifically you want addressed?
No.
Because I mean, you can talk all morning, but I mean, just give me some areas of interest that
well, medicine, yeah, do you want to kind of go into a bit more detail?
Okay. Now, when I talk about cannabis medicines, I'm really talking about the combination of nutritional therapeutics, using the hemp seed as an important part of the nutritional framework, and often using them as a CBD or THC infused food product. So we blur the distinction between what is a medicine and what is a food, which is really the true basis of Hippocratic medicine. Let your medicine be your food and your food be your medicine. I think with hemp, with the seed and with the resins, it gives us that capacity to actually realise that ideal of how to stay well. Yeah. It's hard being unstructured because you can just rave on. So do just sort of say, well, what about, or something like that. I mean, talk about hemp plastics. Hemp plastics are really the way of the future, right? Anyone with any degree of scientific credibility and clarity of mind can see that the petrochemical plastics are ruining this country. They're ruining the country firstly because it's an extractive industry using poisonous products, but there's no dedicated waste stream, and people are becoming aware now that there's hundreds of millions of tons of decaying plastic in the oceans and in landfill, and it's placed a huge future burden on the well-being of the planet, right? Quite literally true. We are creating problems for which there is no ready solution. I disagree that there is no future solution, because by going back to the carbohydrates and actually instigating a revolution from hydrocarbons to carbohydrates, we can create a better world within our lifetimes, right? There is no sooner time to start that transformational development than now. And that's what our projects are largely concerned with.
Okay. And you mentioned hempcrete. What's the basis of hempcrete?
Right. Hempcrete is one of the families of cellulose cement. So rather than using gravel or inert filler material, we use chipped inner fibre or the hurd of the hemp stalk mixed with various lime or magnesium binders to form a cellulose cement material which has similar compressive strength to concrete, but none of the energetic issues, because it actually traps carbon dioxide in its production. So the average suburban house generates about 500 tonnes of carbon dioxide during its construction, whereas a hempcrete house will actually trap or sequestrate about 50 tonnes of carbon dioxide. So there's a huge saving and an actual sequestration. So all this talk of using carbon capture and storage for coal mines is already realised using biosequestration. Sufficient hemp, right? Remember, 10 to 20 tonnes of dried stem material per hectare, right? That is 15 to 30 tonnes of carbon dioxide sequestered into the cellulose. And it really is a very rapid way to get control of the ecological disasters that have been engendered by extractive energy industries.
Does this mean that you could plant hemp where there's been somewhere like Chernobyl or a toxic spill, and the plants will absorb that?
It is true, although there is not a huge amount of information, that hemp can be used as a biosequestration for radio-contaminated land, but it's not that straightforward, because what you can actually do, you can concentrate the radiation, and there's not a lot of information on this, but concentrate the radiation, but then you have to burn the hemp and concentrate the ash. It doesn't make it go away, right? So it's not an ideal way. Like all things in medicine, prevention is better than cure, and the best way to deal with radiation is not to spill it, but it can be used to a point, right? But it's a bit difficult, because you don't actually get rid of the radiation at all, you just concentrate it. So there is a place for it, but I much prefer to concentrate on the cannabis use or the hemp use for improving the soil, right? Hemp has a unique ability when it's grown as an industrial crop to first act as a weed smother crop, right? It's a self-mulching crop, meaning that the bottom leaves, which are nitrogen rich, fall to the ground and smother the crop. So we've got a weed smothering effect, we've got a self-mulching effect. The long taproot brings up the minerals from the subsoil, as well as aerating the soil. Generally, after an industrial hemp crop, whatever following crop is planted will produce 20 or 30% more yield. So it really does have a multiplicity of uses in soil and environmental rehabilitation. It's interesting that America, which is actually the home of the Prohibition from 1937 onwards, depended on hemp in the early days. In fact, the first law made in the United States concerning cannabis was that it was compulsory to grow at least 10% of your acreage to hemp, and you could actually pay your taxes in it. And it's a monument to human hypocrisy, how a plant that was once described as an ancient servant of humanity was then described as a heathen devilweed with its roots in hell. I mean, I've been asked on many occasions, does cannabis cause schizophrenia? And after spending 30 years in this industry, I have no doubt cannabis does cause schizophrenia. You merely have to mention it to a politician and they go completely mad. Right? There's no doubt about that. I've seen it time and time again. A bigger irony, considering that it was claimed that cannabis caused mental illness, it's now been clearly established in a clinical trial that treating people with paranoid schizophrenia with CBD or cannabidiol is actually as effective as risperidone, but with none of the side effects. So not only does it not cause psychosis, it can actually be used to treat it. And a multiplicity of other injuries. On that subject now, CBD is very interesting because anyone who looks at the subject in a clear way has to recognise there can be problems associated, especially with teenage use of cannabis. It is generally associated with two specific factors. Firstly, it's the dose, and the dose is normally exaggerated because the people are really addicted to tobacco, which is co-administered with the cannabis, and it's an addiction to tobacco which is misinterpreted as an addiction to cannabis. That's the first thing. The second thing is, because of the black market, most of the CBD has been bred out of the cannabis, and it's left us with an imbalance between the stimulation of the CB1 receptors and the CB2 receptors. Right? All the side effects seen with excessive cannabis use, some form of toxic psychosis, memory impairment, fuzzy thinking, are all removed by including CBD in the mix. So the prohibition has had the consequence of making the plant or exaggerating dangers that don't need to be there. Right? In fact, CBD cannabis, and by that I mean a combination of CBD and THC, could actually be at the vanguard of a medical revolution over the next decade if we can clear the regulatory hurdles and move forward in the way that substance's qualities really demand that we do.
But that would basically demand the pharmaceuticals to step down a bit and make that very clear.
Well, the people that run pharmaceutical companies believe in the free market. Well, we are the free market. Yeah. What we want to do is free up the market and let us compete on a level playing field. From my experience, the competition between the medical uses of balanced cannabis and the pharmaceutical drugs is there's no competition at all. It's a safer, more effective, better tolerated medication in a range of conditions. And it's generally, we're first applying it in conditions where the allopathic medicines simply are ineffective. Resistant epilepsy, inflammatory bowel disease, these things where they don't really have the answers, we often find them in cannabis because the genesis of these illnesses are in an imbalance of the endocannabinoid system. That's why it's so effective across a broad range of seemingly unrelated medical conditions.